Hey guys, so I wanted to cover some of the more interesting drafts that happened between the T1 wars that just happened between, of course, SKT T1 and KT Roaster, because there were some dynamics of drafts that people are trading, and it's actually really contingent on some of the bans as well. So I know here the main distinction is that there's either 20 ADC bans or there's zero. In this case, it's just the Ashe because this is a very T1 specific pick. There's no other team in the world that's able to pilot it as well as them. So they basically either get a free ban or they get a free Ash opener for a lot of their games, and it's really hard for them to play. The distinction here is that all of the mid laners were banned. So that's where a lot of pressure is right now. And then in this game, which results in the trades between one, the Karma priority on the side of KT Roaster versus the Senna priority on the side of T1. So when you B1 Senna, if you're T1, right, the main response is either you kind of know the Nautilus is coming, generally speaking, with most comps, but your options are either to take the Nautilus and trade it, or you pick a lane in advance that's able to maximize it. And I think this is where I would say there's a bit of a lack of adaptation here from KT, because you know the Nautilus is coming, you know it's going to be a pretty diluting lane. You can pick the Kalista Renata, and it's going to do pretty well, but I think with a lane as all encompassing and sort of not really garnering any openings like it, you would have to get more creative and think of picks that are able to outvalue it, because that's generally the name of the game with a champion like Senna. The karma can be good because you would think about the win condition against Senna, you have the poke condition, so you kind of lock in this core, the mindset's there from KT, where you have Kalista Renata core as in terms of your front to back, and then Karma as the poke option in terms of just in case T1 are trying to match it. There are some DPS options already gone off the table because of the bans, because of the Azir ban and the Ori ban, but realistically, it's not enough output for the answer against Sun on Aulas. I would like to seen some more creative picks with more output. I think champions like Zeri could really succeed here. Even more off meta picks that are able to get more value, like the Jinx in this case, can possibly be good here. And even like one thing, one thing that's not even noted on the radar here, due to the lack of control mages remaining, is something like the Vayne. That can be saved for a phase 2. And it sounds really weird on the surface, but these are the types of picks that you can use to really get past this. And it's because there's a really high emphasis on a lot of laning power. And with Senna lanes in particular, it usually gets away scot-free because of the amount of risk involved. So I really like the adaptation from T1 here to match their poke condition. So now the draft suddenly changes because T1 have a lot of options, both in terms of just overall output, and now they have a high damage output option for their front to back scenarios. So because of that, from this point on, it's really hard for KT to do much. And they're not drafting to win, they're drafting to not lose. You can kind of see it from the Udyr R4 as well. They decide to actually save jungle for counter pick for all intensive purposes, but there's no opening really, and they end up swinging for the Zinzao jungle. So I would say overall, it's like a lack of punish, really, from KT in terms of they're a little bit stiff, is the way to word this, in terms of how they draft for certain compositions and certain matchups. They only have prepared a few things, but they're not willing to go beyond them or adapt beyond them. The opposite version of this happens in game 2, where you see there's 10 million ADCs banned, and T1 get the advantage, of course, in the first game because it's really hard for KT to kind of play overall after the first bit. And this is where the Smolder draft comes in, and I think it's really interesting. It's a really good use case of it. So in the second case, KT switched their approach, and they choke the AD pool. And then, of course, T1 ban Senna because they don't want to deal with it. They're very common to ban Senna because they are the goats of lane diluting, but against lane diluters, they actually feel like they're the better players. So a lot of the times they don't want the chance. Like if they want as much room to be better as possible, if that makes sense. They don't want the matchup to dilute that. So what ends up happening is that Azir Orianna are both open and then they end up being traded. And I believe the remaining ADC out of the litter is Varus. So Again, relatively safe picks overall. T1 or playing a bit more of a aggressive comp this time because they reveal the Vi on R3. So if I'm KT, I want to ban out all these options that will supplement that from T1, true engages and other or champions that can match the Azir front to back, right? The T1 Vi here can be just an indicator of like, hey, this is something to sit on. You need to react to this as well. And that's where the Smolder comes in. And what's really good is that T1 have a very early understanding of where the Smolder slots in. He's very, very high range. He matches the scaling of the Azir, right? He can put that constant threat. It's basically a Zeri, just a little bit longer range. They're kind of similar in terms of their identity. And this actually changes the way the draft flows. So you thought on R3 by revealing Vi, T1 we're going to go forward, right? But then when you go for the Smolder and you realize that T1 actually now outrange and they have a great front to back as well with the other three, you're like, huh. Now KT might have more obligation to go in. And then this is where you see the pivot from the Wukong Nautilus. But this gives a free R5 for support. There could have been a lot of things that probably worked here for T1, but they mainly just needed a facilitator. So that's what they picked in this case. And note here, this is kind of the old versus the new, right? KT, they're kind of living on the last patch a little bit, right? They're using their different priorities, but T1 have an understanding of what the new patch really affects in terms of what picks are good, how it changes certain chains of drafts, and how it causes the enemies to react. Because it looks like KT, although they had something prepared potentially for the Smolder, it wasn't quite enough to address, and they don't fully understand, like, oh, if they pick Smolder in this slot, how does that affect the draft? And I kind of just wanted to highlight that today. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.